Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again with another book review, and today I'd like to review Blake Crouch's Dark Matter, a pretty popular novel published by Ballantine Books in 2016, and it's currently a series coming out. I believe at the time I'll post this, there's 3 episodes out of this show on, I think it's Apple TV. So I'll start off the review spoiler free, and then partway through, I'll shift into more spoiler filled thoughts. I'll clearly signal when I make that shift, though. So here we go. Dark Matter is the story of Dr. Jason Dessen, a physics professor in Chicago, and husband to his beautiful wife Daniela, father to their teenage son Charlie. Jason's pretty happy with his life, but early on you can tell he, like a lot of people, has those kind of nagging thoughts of what could have been if he had made just slightly different choices in his past. What if he pursued his physics research more intensely, maybe sacrificed other aspects of his life? Would he then have success and academic acclaim and fame like his old college roommate now does? A roommate whom Jason feels doesn't quite deserve all that awards and all that recognition. In another life, would Jason's wife, who's an art instructor, would she have launched a more lucrative and exciting career as an artist? As an artist, if she hadn't sacrificed some of her dreams so that they could have their family. These are the sorts of questions that you can tell really early on in the book. They're going through Jason's mind, but he's not thinking about them too seriously. Yeah, at the end of the day, he's very happy with his life. So Jason, at the start of the novel, Jason's about to sit down for dinner with his family. He gets a call to meet that old college buddy, his old roommate, for celebratory drinks at a nearby bar. Daniela says something like, "Why don't you go and congratulate him? We'll wait about an hour, and then we'll do dinner when you get back home." So Jason goes to this bar, one of his favorite local spots. He meets his friend, and then on the way home, he's attacked. He goes through several terrifying kind of step-by-step moments of being abducted, beaten, drugged, and when he wakes up, he's in a world that's not quite right. Now, I will be spoiling a little bit here just about the genre and what type of sciencey, pseudosciency things this book deals with. Just to explain the premise of the novel, if you want to go into the book, or if you're going to start watching the show, if you want to go into either of those totally blind and not even knowing exactly what we're dealing with in the story, then definitely stop watching this review right now. But if, like me, before I read the book, you've heard the type of speculative science and science fiction Crouch is playing around with. If you have some inclination of what the series is about, feel free to stick around for a little longer. I'm still not going to be spoiling anything like major fates of the characters or anything like that, or major turning points. But I will be talking about the weird sciencey stuff that the book deals with. So here we go. Jason is basically in a parallel world, one in which he never married his wife, she never had their son, and apparently he's some super successful cutting-edge scientist, or this world's version of him is, and there's violent and dangerous stakes and consequences surrounding anyone involved with and finding out about Jason's bizarre predicament. Understandably, Jason, our version of Jason, wants to get home. So from here, we go into a couple hundred pages or so of his many attempts to do so, trying to work out the mechanics of multiverse travel, the pseudoscience behind his alternate Jason 2's breakthrough. And it turns out to be a gripping and wild look at how horrifying, really, it can be, coming to terms with the infinity of possibilities in the multiverse. So, what did I think? I really enjoyed it. I feel that Crouch really writes the more thriller elements of the story very well. I believe he has a background in writing thrillers and suspense. So that makes sense why things like a chase or someone surprisingly pulling out a gun, maybe someone checking into a shady motel and suspicious of everyone walking by on the street down below. Also, like a really detailed kidnapping sequence. All of these things are very well written. Crouch also manages to explain complicated aspects of quantum mechanical theory, and in it, what I felt was an extremely approachable way. He always gives Jason someone who would realistically be asking the same questions that we're asking. So he always couples him up with someone to bounce those ideas off of. There are a couple of things that felt a little bit too easy, though, in the explanations. Sort of like Crouch had to come up with some quick, easy answers to make it just a little easier to tell its story. A compelling narrative dealing with such a bizarre scientific kind of concept. For example, there's a question of being selective or navigating two different parallel worlds. And I'm not sure that I really like how this question or this issue was addressed. It seemed kind of more like a way of giving the characters a little more control and agency than they likely would have had if some crazy experiment like this would actually be working. It seemed like he gave the characters a little bit too much control there for what would be realistic, but I can understand, on the other hand, why he wants the characters to have control. He wants to set up goals for them, for the audience or us readers to be rooting along with the characters. He wants to bring us along on this journey, and the characters need to make some kind of progress or discoveries. While I understand some of these easier answers, steps they have to take in trying to get back home and whatnot, it didn't sit quite right with me. But most pseudoscientific theoretical explanations, I found all of that extremely compelling. And then I will say there are times when some characters have such like itchy trigger fingers, or they seem like so ready for violence and beat each other up. I feel like this maybe is a byproduct of the thriller genre bleeding over here. Again, I can understand Crouch wanting to ramp up the stakes and the tension, but it is a bit jarring that like we're dealing with the fear of violent people just chasing after you and pulling out guns, shooting at you, beating you up. The fear of those sorts of things, those kind of more immediate real world thriller type things, clashing with kind of the more daunting and existential fears and horrors and comprehensibility of everything brought up by like when we start messing around with the multiverse and infinity. The theoretical stuff was scary enough for me, and I thought that was a little more gripping than all the chases and guns and stuff. I didn't necessarily need quite as much human to human violence conflict like that. Anyway, I don't want to say much more because I've already probably alluded to things that I'm really trying hard not to spoil. But now I will be moving into full-blown spoiler territory. If you're tuning out right now, thanks for watching so far. And please come back after you've finished the book or maybe checked out the TV show. But if you've read it or you don't mind spoilers, here we go. So right off the bat, I think we should talk about how much more theme-driven this book turns out to be compared to the thriller vibe it established at the beginning with the kidnapping sequence. And I thought it was just going to be a little more, I guess I thought it was going to be a little lighter on the themes, but it wound up being extremely compelling in that component. This book has a very Michael Crichton-y vibe, and author Crouch actually references in an interview included at the end of this edition. But there's definitely that sense of science has gone too far, or science going too far, someone taking a science experiment to a really scary place, people taking things, just too far. Specifically, it's Jason 2, the brilliant scientist who discovers the multiverse travel. He's taken things way too far by opening the door, literally and figuratively, to travel between these universes. And of course, Jason 2's now infiltrated our Jason's life because it's everything he's always wanted, the family and everything, and everything he never had. But that's where the theme, or another one of the main themes comes into play. This book is all about the permanence of our choices and kind of the importance of all of, like, even our smallest, seemingly inconsequential decisions. Those decisions are such a huge part of who we are as people, where parallel versions of ourselves could seem like total strangers because they just made slightly different decisions. And those decisions turn them into really drastically different people. And I think this book is also really about being held, or characters being held accountable for their actions. If you choose one life, deal with it. Like, kind of, you deal with the choices that you've made. Don't try to escape that path that you've set up for yourself. Because any efforts to escape this life or to change things, especially in a literal physics of the universe sort of way, are more often than not just going to make even more and more of a nightmare out of your life. Take responsibility for your choices and embrace the life that you have and whatever happiness you still have, because no matter how alluring the kind of sliding doors thought experiment might be, this novel really exposes the horror and the existential panic that would come from someone literally trying to carry out that experiment and stepping into that other version of their life. I'm saying right now, this is a horror novel more than anything else. That might sound a little strange. Let me explain. It's definitely sci-fi and it's definitely a thriller, but between a world with nuclear fallout, a world where Jason and Amanda have to stay in a house that a family starved to death inside of, like during a snowstorm, and then a world where Jason's whole family and at least all of Chicago have succumbed to some grotesque and horrible disease. All of that is horrifying, but none of it comes close to the horror of Jason at the end getting home, back to his home world, finally to discover that Jason 2's experiment has led to an infinite number of our Jasons trying different things to get back home. And now we have all of these Jasons desperately and sometimes violently trying to be the one who gets to have the happy ending. This is horrifying to come back home and realize just how dangerous it is. And what you're most afraid of are these countless other versions of yourself. And yeah, it's this character that we've been following to kind of put it together at the end and realize, as he realizes, that he is just one version of how all of that multiverse traveling went down. And now that he's successfully gotten home, it's not only uncertain that this version of our Jason will be able to wind up with Daniela and Charlie, but it's also uncertain whether or not he really has any better claim or right to be happy, ending or any better claim or right to a happy ending compared to all these other versions who've been through similar, if not worse, trials to get back here. It's so unsettling, and that Crouch takes this thought experiment all the way to present us with this really grim and unsettling fate for most of the other ways this novel could have gone. I think he just captures that unsettling feeling so well. And the book doesn't go into this fourth wall breaking idea too much or really at all, but it did occur to me, as I'm sure it occurs to a lot of people reading this book. It's kind of right there with us, the reader, and the Jason we've been following, that this version of the text is only one version of this story, and we're only rooting for this Jason because the novel is from his point of view, and not any of the other branching paths he may have taken navigating through the multiverse. So that's a fun idea, only really hinted at, but I wanted to bring it up anyway. It's like we're rooting for him because it's who this story is told through because of the point of view. Yeah, I really enjoyed kind of that head-scratching element near the end of the story. Also, I think ultimately that the conclusion winds up being that once this horrible abduction happened to Jason, there's no going back home. Once you make such a drastic course correction in your life, there's no turning back. He talks about his brownstone house all the time, his favorite places in his Chicago, how safe his version of the world really is, and how he wants to get back there to that place. but ultimately having all of the Jasons wind up in that place turns it into another nightmare world, and there's no going back. Specifically, there's no going back to that place, that setting, but Jason can still get back to his family if he's crafty enough, or at least one of him can, and it just so happens we've been following along with the one that winds up being successful. So Jason realizes there's no going back to how things were. Try to hold on to the happiest things that still remain, in this case his wife and son, but you have to move on. There's no going back. Any attempts to hold on to everything exactly as it was just means you might wind up in even more and more horrific scenarios. Crouch keeps repeating these details about the setting of our Jason Chicago and his home, but also Crouch keeps repeating the details about Jason's happy memories of and life with his wife and son. So in the end, when it's obvious that he can never get back to the there that he's been repeatedly thinking about, we still get a happy sort of conclusion by him getting back to the them that he's been repeatedly thinking about. And Crouch achieves this feeling on addiction level with his use of repetition of these same place names, types of locations, and the constant comparing, contrasting of the various versions of Chicago. And there's like subtle differences, in some cases extreme differences of Chicago to Chicago. I also want to talk about the character Amanda for a little bit. When our Jason is likely going to be tortured and possibly even killed, his friends are already being killed around him because he's clearly not the Jason 2 of that world who has all of this highly secretive scientific knowledge about the multiverse, this great, likely expensive experiment. When it's clear he's stuck here being tortured and watching people die, all because he's not the more professionally successful version of himself, Amanda, the therapist at the lab, breaks him out, and the two of them take enough of the drugs with them, and they get into the box, and they begin their quest hopping across the multiverse, trying to get Jason home. I really like the Amanda character, and I definitely get the sense that she and Jason 2 had maybe more of a romantic thing going on, but now, even though both Amanda and our Jason are lost in the multiverse, panicked about all of these horrible worlds they're traveling to, I was happy to see Crouch kind of restrict them and have them both resist that lure of this kind of sexual, intimate sort of comfort. Other versions of them might not have resisted this, but our versions did, and really it just becomes a nice and fleshed out friendship, more of a supportive dynamic, until I'd argue Amanda realizes something about the multiverse a little before our Jason does. They get to a world that seems okay, and she might keep hopping to different worlds, sure, but she does know that she has to break off the course of her life from Jason's trying to get back home, because just because he's trying to get back to his perfect home doesn't mean that that world's going to be perfect for her. So she decides to leave him. And I think a big part of this decision is that Amanda realizes that at some point she just has to stop, go off, branch out on her own, and start living her own life again. She can't keep this up, this insane multiverse travel, because there's no going back to the way things were before, and so she wisely takes off. Now, she may not have realized how unsettling Jason's home had actually become with all of those different versions of him there, but her ultimate realization, I think, is extremely similar to the way in which our Jason and Daniela and Charlie all decide at the end to go off to live in a different parallel world at the end, knowing that after this traumatic kidnapping and all these horrors, in a psychological and figurative way, transformed into a literal reality by Crouch's deft use of the sci-fi genre. In this way, there's no going back to a time before those horrors. We can only move forward and cling to what happiness we can still manage to recover and find. Only a couple negatives I want to talk about really briefly. And it's mostly just with the mechanics and explanation of everything in the world. I alluded to one of these in the spoiler-free section, but here's kind of a more detailed version of that. First, the fact that steering or piloting the box and navigating the multiverse comes down to basically wishing and really, really focusing and thinking hard enough on the type of world you want to emerge into. It can get you closer and closer to the world you're trying to get back to. That seems kind of like a too easy answer or solution to the more narratological problem that Crouch had of needing his characters to have somewhat of an achievable goal. So he threw this ability to navigate the multiverse in the book, this close your eyes and tap your heels together, there's no place like home kind of idea. That's what it kind of felt like to me when I personally would bet on if something like this actually existed, this box. I would bet that it would be, or I would bet there would be no real way to navigate it at all with that infinite number of possible universes. So yes, I understand why that's in there. A storyline needs to happen and Jason needs to be working towards something, but it wasn't the most satisfying answer or execution of an answer for me. I also am still having trouble wrapping my head around the version of Jason who is all beaten up and bloody inside the kind of mind space hallways when they're looking at the doors. It was my understanding that that hallway space was imagined or dreamed up by both Jason and Amanda as a way for them to visualize the multiverse. And they would go into that place once they were locked in the box and the drug kicked in. So I guess I was given to understand that at least in that hallway place, it could only be the two of them who went into that box. And eventually just Jason who's in that box, who just the people who physically go in there from their previous location. So I'm not exactly clear or sure how they were able to see, maybe dream up another version of a beaten up Jason in there with them. Like, sure, if they went into another universe and saw him there, but that hallway, my best understanding was that was just a space that the two people in that box, or whoever's in that box from the previous world, you're the only ones that really show up there. Unless this other beaten up Jason was just some kind of projection of a version of himself, of the horrific possibilities that could lay ahead, and not an actual other version of himself. But yeah, so I'm still a little confused on that point. Anyone with a better explanation, please comment below. I'd love to hear more answers or more thoughts about this. But anyway, that should just about do it. This is a great novel that turned out to be more terrifying and unsettling than I ever expected. A few head-scratching tidbits that still have me a bit uncertain how I feel about the pseudoscience of it all, but really, really powerful stuff about being stuck with the decisions we've made and living our lives to the fullest despite the permanent paths those decisions might have set us on. Great book. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day.